Wake up, buyer payer people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhoads on the Buy Here Pay Here Morning Show. Take it away, you two.
Hey, so is it time to do the show?
It's time to do the show.
Gosh.
Yay!
Kind of scrambled in here at the last minute. It happens. But.
Well, the topic we were, Jim's like, I know we've talked about something like this before. So going through and looking at old podcasts, and there was one that I'll bring up later that you can view. That's kind of like supplemental to what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, it's Friday.
You'll take care of this.
Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why I just woke up in a really, really good mood. I don't know if it's
good.
It's Friday or whatever. Good for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm usually in a good mood.
I've been self-employed for a long time, so Friday's a lot like Saturday for me.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, we've been trying to not work on the weekends.
True.
So there's always little bits of stuff that happen,
some of our car dealer listeners can relate. Like they're the work doesn't stop. It's part of business ownership, and you do have to kind of create some rails. But that's not what we're here to talk about today.
No, it's not. Virtual happy hour for the dealer only principal group is coming up on the 6th. So it is the 2nd. So that's like next week.
Yeah. I spent some time yesterday going out and trying to track down the folks. We got a number of people who haven't filled out the questionnaire. Got to have the questionnaire because that's where you pledge your privacy, your confidentiality.
Yeah.
So got to have that.
Yeah.
And so we've been trying to get those.
For those of you who have, I think that we've got all of them resolved. But once you fill out the questionnaire, you got to go back in and accept the invitation because we've got about 90 people sitting out there that were waiting to get some of these pieces done to get them in because there's already some good conversation and it's just going to get better. So
I reached out to a lot of them yesterday. Just check your Facebook Messenger. We'll be emailing some of them as well. But got to have those questionnaires.
So this is a dealer principal or like a co-owner kind of thing. So it's people that are the dealer principal, people that are, and we have questions all the time about, well, my manager does everything. It's like your manager doesn't because they don't make the hard decisions that only the dealer can, which are, the hard financial decisions, all of those kind of things. And so that's why we've got that as a dealer principal. Also, just Jim sent out some things. V8, we've got the group that's meeting, the first group. What day are they meeting? On the 8th?
Yeah, the 8th.
So next week, we do have one spot left for that group, and that's kind of for mid-sized dealers. And but we're prepared to add groups. So when we fill it up, that doesn't mean that you've lost your chance ever.
Yeah, no, there will be plenty of opportunities. I think I heard from one dealer who has an interest if they take a spot. That I did put a post out that we have one spot left in group 1 that meets on Tuesday it's Thursday.
And Thursday next week,
the 8th. And so we've got still got a seat technically in that group. So just reach out if you have an interest, because the one dealer who spoke up and says, I want a seat, really is probably going to be in one of the other groups. So
yeah.
So all good.
And so we have 3 of those newbies, which is, you don't have a lot on the portfolio, but it's just kind of talking about some of the things that you should be looking at and looking at the numbers and some great conversations we had with our first group meeting for the newbies too. And then the bigger group, there's some availability for that one for when they have a big inventory.
Don't forget our dealer roundup on the 15th.
Dealer roundup on the 15th.
Finalizing our guests now. I did get a couple more commitments yesterday, so and we're
be watching for that.
We're 11th hour, but we know you dealers don't sign up till the last 3 days anyway. It's not an insult. That's what you do. So
and it's because we know you all have a ton of stuff going on.
And it's tax refund season.
It's tax refund season, and you'll see something and you're like, oh, that's cool, that's interesting, and then it kind of leaves your brain And so, you'll see a big push the week before.
Yep.
For, we're doing this thing, and it's only going to be, in the past, we've done 6 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
These are going to be only 3 sessions, but we're going to do them every other month.
Yeah.
So there should be 6 of them this year.
I can tell you that amongst our panelists that are confirmed, Melanie Goldman out of Indiana. Then we have Edgar Rodriguez out of Houston.
Nick Markosian
from here in Salt Lake. And then Dan Grosvenor out of Missouri. So we've got those panelists coming. We've got others. We've got some co-moderators that are getting finalized. And so, it's going to be 3 important topics.
Yep.
And so we look forward to seeing all of you virtually on the morning of the 15th.
Yes.
Shall we get to our topic?
And wait, it's the morning of the 15th. That's the day after Valentine's Day, dealers.
Oh, yeah.
So, we were talking about how, it's, that's nice. And you forget about it. Don't forget that Valentine's Day is coming up. And
some of you may be out late that night because you forgot to make reservations. So you don't get into the restaurant till 10 p.m. So that,
what we typically do is like go the day before or the day after to just celebrate, because oh my goodness, it's like that and trying to get into a Mexican restaurant on Cinco de Mayo.
True.
It's hard.
Yeah. We'll wait for that though. So
All right. So today's topic.
It's I keep saying this like it's a big topic. It's an important subject in that we're covering what I call deficiency resolution.
And this is something we've seen some conversation happening on social.
Yep.
So, And
I wanted to break it down. I think, you can't, one of the things about our business is you can't prepare for every scenario. But what we're going to offer here today is a framework that you can use in the most exaggerated scenarios, and then you can bring it back to apply it to almost any scenario. So we could also call this internal trades. Like we're trading with customers who they have a car financed with us, and there's something that's happened of a significant nature. Either the car got wrecked, maybe there's insurance, maybe there's not. There's a mechanical problem. Maybe there's a service contract, maybe there's not. Maybe it's covered, maybe it's not. There're just going to be scenarios where the customer's financed with us. There's something major has happened. Now the car is worth less on a wholesale value than what it was when they bought it. And so the discrepancy between what they owe and its current real cash value is wide. So how do we fix that?
And can I just, when we were talking this morning about this subject, it's interesting how many topics are woven into this same basic overall thing in a way, because it's like the insurance companies, and it's like that there's a problem right now. Insurance companies are becoming way too expensive. Why do you suppose that is? And the conversation is like, well, I would imagine, do you remember how high car prices were? And they're starting to come down, but they're still high over the last few years. And then as people have accidents or whatever, they're looking for a replacement. And it's just like, I'm sure it's killing insurance companies. And so their rates are going up. And, it's one of those things where there's like such lasting ripples to a lot of different things. And this deficiency or negative internal debt, that's one of the ripples of the cost of cars going up. And it'll all balance out eventually, but this is where we're at.
Yeah. And I think I think you touched on it there. Like the cost of car was up. It's stabilizing now and maybe even coming down some. But we have, as one of, I think it was Robert Blankenship. I hope I'm remembering the name right. But it's out of the East Coast, chimed in on that same thread that we're talking about the recent questions about how to handle these trades. And, he made the point, which we know is true. Excuse me. That is, with COVID, selling prices were up. And so now we've got these high balances. And so when there's a problem, it's, we hope the wholesale value is also up on whatever car we're talking about trading in. But I think regardless, today I want to go through the math. I referred to a document. So this there's a document that we provide that is called, I called it a deficiency resolution. I created it in my own dealership.
Reach out.
I
Yeah.
remember sharing it with a number of dealers back then. Like we had in my 20 group or whatever, we had a number of dealers who wanted to use it. Because as you and I talked about this morning, when you got dealers even coming in to buy here, pay here from franchise or independent retail, they're not used to dealing with this scenario. They're not used to having their own internal payoff. Right on trade in. And so it's a thing we have to figure out how to handle.
Well, and it's if they're not in buy here, pay here, it's not that it doesn't happen, but it's never their problem.
Right.
And this is your problem. And so, cause if it was it's like, well, if you want to trade this in, that's fine, but you're going to have to figure out how you're going to pay this back to your lender, because most lenders aren't just going to write it off.
Right.
And that's kind of where we're coming at, is that, that this form and a white hat approach to this problem is a little different than you might see. And it doesn't, and one of the things that we just want to say right out of the gate, it doesn't mean that you need to write off the entire balance.
Right.
At all.
And I wish I could credit who said it, because I've kind of paraphrased it for years. And it is just this idea that just because we lose the car doesn't mean we should lose the customer. So if we can find a way to save the deal and save the customer, because as some of the people commented, look, if I've got a good customer and they've been paying well, and then when we face this setback, we talk about often what we call the 10-year approach. Well, if this customer is going to be with us for 10 years, then surely we can make the math work on what we're doing here to get to the next deal and keep them in some transportation. So there's lots of layers to this. I just think for today, I wanted to be able to introduce the math behind how we would sit down. And before we get into the math, go ahead.
Well, and well, before we get into the math, what were you going to say? Because you may be segueing into what I wanted to say.
I think the part I was going to touch on was this idea that it's easy for me to think about as a former dealer. And the phrasing that you're going to hear me use today, and I'm going to kind of role play as if I'm talking to the customer. And as I do that, I want you to think about how would this language be different if it was the dealer sitting in front of the customer versus the sales manager sitting in front of the customer versus a salesperson sitting in front of the customer, or even a collector cashier. So it's like it starts somewhere. And so now the question is, I know what I would say.
It was a segue, by the way.
Oh, it was the same thing?
It was a great segue.
Oh, okay, good.
But you know what you would say as a dealer.
Yeah. So that's why we'll get there. But I'm just saying, as you hear these things, I would ask you to think about, I can hear myself saying it as a dealer. How would I get my team? And hopefully this tool that I'm about to show you would help you do that, because I think it's not so much what the numbers say, it's back to how you present the numbers. So that's back to my own sales experience, from franchise and whatever else. But it's also just about a white hat sales approach. It's about looking people in the eye and, taking ownership of what's yours and having a
conversation. Sure. It's like a really transparent, honest conversation with solutions woven in.
And relationship equity would be huge here.
Okay.
It would be very helpful.
Which, great segue, honey. Thank you. I'm like the relationship that I guess that's where I add some value.
Among other things.
One of the things that, this is a negative internal trait. I think that, many of us in whatever it is that we've done in the past, probably vehicles or whatever, have been put in a situation where it's like, crap, I need to do this, but it's going to put me under, and that level of stress. And we already know that our customers are typically under a lot of financial stress. They are so stretched thin that sometimes it's a difference between putting 3 gallons of gas in their car and buying a gallon of milk so they can have cereal in the morning. So this is, it's already a high stress situation. And so first off is like, put yourself in their shoes. This is not going to be an easy conversation. They're well aware that they still owe you money, but they need a solution. And so sometimes they will come at you guns blazing and say, this is your problem or whatever, or just be like, I don't know what to do. Now, as Jim said, one of the first things, it's like, relationship equity is something you should be working on the entire relationship so that you can get them in your office in a seat across the table from you.
Good.
And relationship equity is reaching out, I hope you're having here's a little tip. Here's we've got this thing going. That's a whole nother topic. But when they sit down in front of you, they're already stressed. So I cannot, as the relationship, person, I cannot stress hard enough that it is essential at the beginning of the conversation to recognize the stress that they are experiencing. And it's like, and being empathetic about what it is that they are experiencing right now. And it's just like, hey, this is rough. You must be really, or thank you so much for coming in. I know it was probably hard because, that there's something here that we can solve that there's a problem that we can solve. I'm so glad that you came, but recognize them and recognize and be empathetic, because what that will do is that will put you guys on the same side of the table.
Yeah.
Really, really quickly. Just be empathetic. I know that this is rough. Thank you. Empathetic. Thank you for coming in and talking to me about this.
Sure.
And so take the first few moments of the conversation to not get into numbers, to not get into what this looks like, but to recognize the situation and how much stress it's causing your customer.
Sure. And then I think in addition to that, most everything that you're going to hear me say today, as I kind of talk through this, as I role play it as if I'm sitting in front of a customer, think about how this sounds to the customer. If the customer likes me or likes my company and likes doing business with me, think about how the phrasing is different here, because the customer probably wants to stay. They would probably prefer that I help them into another car and that they continue to do business for years and years. But if that's not the feeling or the attitude of the customer, then everything we're about to talk about becomes much more difficult.
It does.
So it's like, it's still the math. Like, you still got to figure out a solution and try to save the deal. So there's profit motives here. There's customer satisfaction motives here. There's all these things wrapped up in the whole thing. And so again, I'm taking inside the math, but I think it's important to think about what this looks like. And so
and also to recognize you don't have to say it, but you've already won a huge battle if they're talking to you about it.
Right.
A huge one. And that is something we're celebrating internally. Even if they come in, it's like, what are you going to do about it? It's like, oh man, that must really be stressful. I feel for you. And yeah, we're going to talk about it. We're going to try to figure this out. But, or whatever it is, that it might be an accident. Is everyone okay? Are you all okay? Okay, well, good. And so, yes,
good.
But they're there. That's a big win already.
Yeah. And I think even before you show the spreadsheet here and we start talking about the numbers, I think it's important to emphasize something. And I can't remember, Michelle, if we have in the Institute any sessions on what I call the power, putting power in the paper. I don't recall that being in there, but power in the paper is something I've typically included in training. And I think as we step into this conversation, I would say that it's important that we'll insert that language at a point that it became necessary, if it becomes necessary. But when I say power in the paper, what I'm really saying is the customer, we need to do the best we can to help the customer differentiate, because this is one of the big problems we face in Buy Here, Pay Here. In this, it's just a general knowledge gap, to use, what Candace Bryce shared with us, is like this knowledge gap for the customers, like this, the difference between the car as collateral and the significance of their signature on a piece of paper and the contract. So the example I've always used, and I want to share it before we get into the numbers here, because there's a white hat element to this. So for those of you who hear us talk about white hat way, this is me trying to be a good guy and do a good thing for a customer and help them solve a problem. Obviously, I own the problem too. What's their problem is my problem as well. So I'm going to step in and try to resolve it in the most genuine and, forward thinking way. Like
and
I'm thinking
kind.
long term.
Yeah, but yeah. So
I'm definitely going to be kind. I'm just thinking long term about how to solve the problem. And so as I do that, I know that I have to walk that line between what is the customer's responsibility and what is my responsibility. So for the sake of our conversation here today, let's talk about the piece about, let's keep it simple. There's all these different elements. There's car insurance, there's no car insurance. There's CPI, they didn't pay the premium. There's all these scenarios where, we have coverage. Let's take a scenario where none of those things are in place. Just keep it simple. And then you add back the pieces that are relevant in your particular situation. But let's say the car's as is, or the warranty just expired. There's no warranty anymore. And so so whose financial responsibility is it?
And we know with the paper, legally, contractually, it's their responsibility.
And we may never have to say it, but there've been times in my career as a dealer where you did have to sort of walk through that carefully and just say, let's understand before. And usually when I would present it, I wouldn't even pause. Like I would just say to the customer, now, before we go any further, I think it's important to remember, technically, legally, it's all your responsibility. Like you signed a contract, and irrespective of what's going on with the collateral, it is your financial responsibility. And as we step into this and start to look at the numbers, see, I didn't even pause. I just went right on into it is your financial responsibility. However, it doesn't mean I'm not going to help you. Let's look at some numbers and let's figure out how I can help you into another car. So, and I've been through this. I mean, back in my own dealership, we had pretty low ACV, short-term contract. It happened that the car would break down. It would be an accident, whatever. And so we were faced with this quite often, and the numbers were different than what I'm going to show you here today, but the ratios are still the same. It's a question of how do you solve this? So, apologies to our folks who will tune in on audio after the fact. Like I
check
think
us out on YouTube.
Yeah, find it on YouTube so you can see the numbers. But I'll do the best I can to talk through it. If you want to go ahead and show the screen,
I can.
Let's start talking about this
and I'm going to bring
internal trade calculator. Okay, so first thing I want to show.
Well, I just want to point out Jim is like a numbers nerd. Is that okay? He's a numbers nerd, and it's just so endearing to me. And so he has spreadsheets and tools like this for so many different things that, he has developed over almost 25 years. So
I have spreadsheets to keep up with my spreadsheets. Like, I'm that guy, right?
Okay. So let's talk about the thing.
All right. So internal trade. Let's go slowly here because this is important math. So let's just say the customer's account balance is the first thing I load. I'm sitting with the customer and let's talk about how I would present this. So let's, rest assured, Mr. Customer, I'm going to do what I can to help you solve this. You've been really, done really great with your payments. We certainly want to have you stay around as a customer, and we're going to do the best we can to figure this out. So let's start working with the math here. So what I show is that your payoff on your account is, I just threw in some numbers. All the yellow fields are numbers that I would fill in. And let me just try to be a salesperson for a minute. Let's say the sales manager is busy with another customer. The dealer is gone on vacation or is at a car auction, and it's on me to figure this out. So if I'm a salesperson, I can start working through this. I show your account balance on this other car is 10,307. Now we're going to need to trade the car in, and then somebody's going to have to help me figure out what its value is going to be.
Hopefully it's not a total loss
in its current condition.
Yeah.
But I think you and I understand, Mr. Customer, if the car has a blown motor, if we send it to an auction today without it's not running, and somebody's going to have to put an expensive motor in it and have the time and labor and all the parts, everything that's going to, the car's not going to bring much. So I don't know what that number is. Somebody will help me figure that out. But if we're able to get you $1,500 for the car as it is, I know there's a lot more to figure out.
We'll help you.
Yeah.
Let's get it.
That would be some
get
trade
it traded
allowance.
in and sold or something.
So if we got $1,500 trade allowance, this is, if this is kind of the approach that I learned as a salesperson, and we teach it, is this is sort of, if I could, would you? Like, it's not my decision, but if I could get you $1,500 of trade allowance, and I'm looking the customer squarely in the eye as I talk about this, and I'm saying, if I could get you $1,500 in its current condition, would that work for you? And the customer may come back and say, really, that's all it's worth? Whatever.
But I still owe more money, or
there's still a lot more money. I understand. We're going to try to figure that part out, but I'm just really the facts that you and I are both faced with is the car's current value is really only this, and it's the collateral on the loan. We're going to trade it in, and I'll get you all the help I can. But if I can get you $1,500, that's probably going to be all the cars are going to be worth in its current condition. And if they come back and say, man, that's rough, if surely we can get 2,500, I think I got a buddy who will give 2,500 for it. So, okay, well, let's do this then. Let me put in 2,500 right there, and let's just see what it looks like. And now if I did get you a $2,500 trade allowance, we still got this trade deficiency to talk about. You've got $7,800 difference there between what we can allow in trade and your account balance. And of course, technically you're financially responsible for all of it, but you can see here that I've got it set up in a way that we just need to figure out like what your commitment would be. If we split that 50-50, because it's not your fault, it's not our fault. If we just started in a 50-50 deal, it's a tough situation.
We want to keep you as a customer. We want to be able to keep you in the family.
And so if we meet you halfway, right? And again, I'm trying to insert wherever the conversation feels natural. I'm going to insert this idea that it's all your financial responsibility, but I'm going to help. So if I met you halfway, this is what it would look like. If we had you take responsibility for half and we took responsibility for the other half, that would be, and I call it set aside. So this language is important. So let me just take a minute here. I say, if the finance company agreed to set aside that other $3,900, you accept responsibility for half. If the finance company were to set aside the other half, I chose that language in my deficiency resolution. And we're happy to share the deficiency resolution. I'll just say here that please have your attorney look at it. We would have had our attorney look at it back when, and you would need to have your attorney look at it before you entered into an understanding. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool. It's trying to reach an understanding with the customer that is agreeable, and we're trying to do it in the most transparent and fair way possible.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing too when you have something like this that you can use. So many people are visual, and so this instead of just talking numbers.
Right.
That they can see numbers and they can, and work that way, that way. And it sinks in differently, and they can see what you're doing, what they're doing, and not just, I have to pay an extra this. It's like, oh, okay, you're writing off okay.
And so again, I'm not going to pause much here, and the customer's looking at those numbers and it's really big, but I think most of us who've been around the business a long time know that all these numbers are interesting to the customer. The customer's like, can you help me into another car or not? I don't have much down payment today. I got to get to work on Monday. What are we going to be able to do here? So that's really where the customer's mindset is. And so these numbers, while they may be a little frightening and it's unfortunate and it's kind of scary for the customer, we're not finished yet. So we're just kind of talking numbers and mapping out scenarios. And as she said, it's transparent. I didn't point out when I started, I've got 2 sheets in this workbook. You can see down here at the bottom that it says visible. So this is a visible one that we would, and maybe you just make this other one password protected so that, only the salesperson can sit here with the customer and show them the screen. Okay. So now and so you can name it whatever, but now I go and we start talking about now, if we are able to help you with financing on another vehicle, then we're going to help ourselves. The more affordable the car that you choose, the better my chance of being able to help you today. Because if we have to carry some inequity from this other car and we choose an expensive car, that makes it really difficult. It makes for a really long loan, or it makes for really high payments, and it may be really difficult to do. So one of the ways you can help yourself here today is, let's try to choose a car that's as affordable as possible so that we can, we don't compound the problem, and just say to the customer, this is our reality. We're working with you. And so this is one way you can help yourself. Right. And so I'm just saying, so I picked it $11,995. I put some add-ons in there. Obviously every dealer's add-ons would be a little different. And now that's telling me that I have to add now the customer commitment over here, the 3903, the part that they've agreed to accept responsibility for after the trade's considered. Is that number right there. So now I've got back in yellow, these are the fields I would put my own numbers in. And I would say, how much down payment can you do today? And sometimes that's 0. Why? Because we're sitting here with an accident in between paychecks, or
They already have other things that they're having to deal with.
They're paycheck to paycheck. And if today's not payday, they probably don't have the money. And so are we going to wait till payday till we help them into another car? If so, we'll be prepared to lose them, because if we're going to make them wait until payday and now there's money in fist, then the temptation is to just walk away from the deal with you and go put a down payment on something else.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the temptation is always there. We know that customer that we finance is often in that predicament, and they're just kind of, trying to solve their problem as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And they'll deal with what comes, when it comes. So this is hard math, though. When we look at that, and we're going to take a car that is a selling price of 11.9, and now with all these numbers we've got in there, we're suddenly financing 16.3 on a car that's priced at 11.9 at these numbers. And so as a salesperson, I don't have to be very experienced to know that's a tough deal. That's not great for the customer. It's not great for us. And so I got to start to try to figure out a different solution. And so there's ways that, I would get there. And so I can just tell we're already 30 minutes in. We're going to run along here because there's quite a bit still to talk about.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's important. This is the kind of education I think is, it's just thinking through the math.
And more than anything, it's about how to have the conversation with, this is the breakdown of how this works.
It's both. It's the conversation and it's the math. I mean, the math is the reality for the dealer. And so we'll get to the actual profit implications of whatever we do here. But because I'm looking at this, if I'm a sales manager or dealer, I'm saying, this deal, this looks really rough. And by the way, this trade allowance, those not familiar, the trade allowance is not necessarily the car's real value. That's what we're allowing the customer on the car as a trade-in. And what it's going to be, its real wholesale value behind the scenes is up to us. It's for us to know, and the customer won't necessarily know that number. So that's important for us to remember, because it's one of the tools in our tool belt, as we work through this deal. But I'm still trying to keep that number as close to the real cash value as possible. Why? Because every dollar that I go above its real cash value is coming out of it gets adjusted from the profit in the transaction. And not that we're necessarily motivated by profit here. We're trying to save the deal and trade it to customer. We still have to look at how it hits our books, right? Both from a cash flow standpoint and a profit standpoint. So again, I've got a trade allowance in there, and we'll talk about the ACV in a minute. But now that I look at this, I'll say, tell you, Mr. Customer, I think that's just going to be too much. I mean, that's so much. Since if you were in a position to do some down payment, that would obviously help. You're going to finance less, and it's going to keep you from being, so much farther underwater. But what if I can get them to stretch to something more like, let's just look at like 65%. So what it does, I did that backwards, 35% for the customer. And now it calculates how much would go to a finance company. If I could get that done, that looks like it shaves about, and is there any chance that you could come up with any down payment? Because obviously what we want to try to do is keep this finance amount from being too much. The closer we can get that to the price of the vehicle. And by the way, I didn't mention it, but I personally don't recommend to our clients that they discount the replacement vehicle. They're already suffering on the loss of the car that's coming back to them. And so I think we need to maintain the integrity of our pricing. And so in my way of thinking, and I'll show you the impact of all these things when we get to the other screen, but I'm going to recommend we keep the price of the vehicle that they're buying the same. And if that means stretching the trade allowance a little bit, then we can stretch the trade allowance. So I'm going to go back to the customer. I'm going to say, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just playing with numbers here, and I can't promise you anything. I'm going to have to get the okay. But if I could stretch this trade allowance to $3,000, if I could get you $3,000 for the car in its current condition, now we're down to $7,307. If I can get the dealership to agree to set aside 65% instead of 50, then that trims your commitment down to $2,557. Keep in mind, customer owes the full difference between, they really fully owe the $7,307. And that's with me stretching the trade. So, but they're fully financially responsible for the whole thing. Now, that's easy to say, hard to get the customer to agree to follow through on that, but that is our financial reality. That's where we sit. Okay. So now I'm stretching that part. Now, if I get the customer to say, what about some deferred down payment? Can you do any down payment today, even a small amount? Well, I can do maybe 300. Okay. So let's put that in there. And now you can see that's helping, because now we're back to under 15 grand. You got a selling price of the car of 11.9. Again, it's a tough situation. And I've got some stuff in the background that we can cover. Excuse me, if this starts to get sideways with the customer, but it shouldn't, because I'm just working with them and I'm just talking numbers and we're just trying to solve a problem, and I'm helping the customer see how big a problem it is.
And part of this though is like we've talked about in the past, is the knowledge gap that really helping to educate them about there is a difference between the car and the contract.
Yeah.
and
Sure.
And that the contract, you sign the contract, the car is the collateral. That's a really great thing to educate people early on in your relationship with them, in just a nice, friendly, helpful kind of way, that if there's ever a problem, let us know, because the contract is what matters.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think here, the other thing I didn't really explain is that now we're at a 35% commitment for the customer. And now the finance company's picking up 65. That set aside language in the document, that is the deficiency resolution, we use the phrasing set aside. And basically what it says is the finance company agrees to set aside and not pursue collections on this balance so long as the customer's in good standing on the replacement vehicle. And so again, you'd have to run it by your attorney, but we're basically saying we're agreeing. It's not that we're writing it off. That's why I purposefully don't say charge off, write off. I say we set it aside. And what we do after the customer's gone is a different matter, but I'm asking the customer to accept financial responsibility for that.
So are you saying then that, let's say they get into the new car and they're 3 months in and they default,
I would reserve the right in that document
to be able to say, you got both of them now.
Could conceivably pursue all of it. Did I ever as a dealer? No. I'm just saying, but what we say, the language that we use with the customer is important here. And we want them to have the feeling of commitment and responsibility. They are financially responsible.
Like if you will be responsible for making your payments and keeping things on track and all of that, that we are willing to set this aside. So at the end of the contract.
Well, no. So I'll get to what happens behind the scenes after the customer trades. But you can see what I'm trying to do here. I'm asking the customer, I'm saying, look, we're prepared to help you if you're prepared to help yourself and do your part. Okay. So this is where we sort of are asking the customer to, understand their role in all of this. And I'm realizing as we talk about this, that the screen's pretty small. I'll see if I can increase it a bit. But bottom line is we've got to make sure that, the customer can see all this and understand. And so now I'm just putting the price in here again. So now I'm down to $14,700 to be financed, and the customer is now, look what's happening for the customer. There's $5,000 that they're financially responsible for, almost, that's going away. And they get to put it aside, and as long as they follow through on the new deal, then they're able to move forward. Now, this is just for internal use, and this the customer can still see. This is what the deal is going to look like. Selling price of the car is this. The trade allowance currently is set at $3,000. For our team, what that says is the internal trade payoff to enter is actually $55.57. So where did I get that number? That's the combination of the payoff that they are picking up, the $25.57 plus the $3,000 trade allowance. So the net effect of that would be this line down here that you see on row 21, which is, now that I've given the customer a $3,000 trade and we've added back the internal trade payoff of $55.57, the customer ends up accepting responsibility for that difference of $25.57. That was the number we agreed to above. So it's bringing that over. So this is why I wanted to walk through it. Like, I think it's important to see what the math looks like. And this is a part I always had to coach, even when I was a dealer, our managers and people back at the dealership. Here's what the math has to look like when you load the deal. So this basically brings the balance, at least the trade payoff balance, over to the other account. And now it says, see the recap sheet for internal handling of the rest of this. So it brings the numbers over. So now let's say the customers agreed to all that, and we're doing the deal. And so now we got to see, what does this look like in the software now? When we go over to load this deal, here's what it looks like. So on this other screen, you've got trade allowance shown to the customer. Again, this is the private screen. So now let's do the real trade ACV. What's a car really worth with a blown head or blown motor, or, with the front clip gone, or whatever the situation is? What's its real cash value? And if I put $800 in there, I'd made a note for the team. That's what the vehicle is going to come back in inventory for, $800, which means we're not postponing any wholesale loss. If I brought the car back into $3,000, I would have a $3,000 car sitting on my inventory that's really only worth $800. I'm just deferring the outcome. I'm waiting to suffer some wholesale loss. I would rather just deal with it in the transaction. Now I bring the car back in at $800. It's all washed out. When I sell the car, I hope it really brings $800, and I won't. So now it says the adjustment to gross profit from over allowance. So for those not familiar, that's what it looks like. I'm giving the customer $3,000. Car's really only worth $800. It's an over allowance. It gets adjusted from the gross profit in the deal. So now the anticipated wholesale loss, though, if the vehicle sells for what I say its ACV is, then I don't experience any future wholesale loss. Okay, so I'm wrapping it all in one deal. Now the internal payment applied to the original account, because I got to go pay off the $5,557 that the customer's accepting responsibility. I'm moving that to the new account as an internal payoff, and now I've got an internal write-off after the customer's gone. We're calling that a set-aside balance. But I'm not going to leave it sitting unpaid on my active receivables report. I'm going to write it off, and because the customer's only going to have one account, one active account, that's going to be the new account. This balance is going away, but I don't ever say to the customer that I'm writing it off or charging it off. That's up to us after the deal is gone. We also have credit reporting implications to think about here. So if we got to be careful, if we charge that off, the customer could be showing impact from a charge off, even though they didn't. That's not exactly what happened here. So this is my preferred method of handling this. We just write it off, and in most systems, you could write off that portion at the time that you post this payment. This 5557, you would post it as a payoff and reference it's an internal trade to stock number such and such, and now you write off the remaining balance. And so let's go through the rest of this. So now what's the inventory cost of the vehicle that they're buying? I put in $6,300 for this car that they're buying for $11,900. So the resulting gross profit on that sale is $5,695. There's an adjustment to the gross profit from over allowance. There's a post-delivery write-off. And so the impact of that deal for us is a negative $1,254. Even though we kept the selling price of the car the same, we didn't reduce the price of the car that they're buying, and so we got a full gross profit on that sale, that quote unquote what I call a make good sale. We're just making good and trading them into something. We didn't really sell a car. It goes on our sales report, but we didn't really sell a car. We just traded somebody into a make good situation, and so this is what it's going to look like, though. That's our profit. So there's cash too. From a cash standpoint, what happened to us? We got a small down payment, 63. What did we have? Ended up at $300. So from a cash standpoint, we're rolling a $6,300 car that we got to replace. We only got $300 down, so we're negative $6,000 right there. And then we brought in a real value of $800 for a trade. We're going to hopefully recover cash for that real $800. So that's where you're at from a cash perspective. We're negative from a cash standpoint. What was that? $5,200. So and our profit is that. But we've saved a customer. We've got a customer, and we're still in a pretty precarious position. You can take that off the screen now. I think those are the parts that people need to really see. We're still in a precarious position with this customer, but it's better than losing the customer altogether. I didn't say too, one of the things that I would definitely be incorporating here is when I'm looking at this situation back over there where the balance for the customer is $14,000 on a $12,000 car, I would be asking, hey, these payments are either going to need to be high. We need to keep this loan from getting too long. So these are all things I can just say to the customer. I can talk to them. Look, it's not a good situation for you or for us if we make this contract too long. So that's going to obviously cost you a lot of interest. So how can we shorten this up? How would you feel about making payments in this agreement from your tax refund every year? And if I said, could we do like $800 every year in March, in addition to your regular payments? If you could do that, I can help keep your payments down.
Low. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's all got to go in the payments, and I need to try to keep the loan at a reasonable term for both of us. So one of the ways I can solve that is if you agree to a tax refund, like if you and your family typically get a tax refund every year, you don't need to pay all of it, but if you could pay some chunk of that, then obviously $800 would be roughly representative of two extra payments every March. And that's going to help keep your payments reasonable. And it's going to get this thing paid off without just really killing you on interest. And so is that workable for you? And when I present it in that way to customer, they almost I can keep my payments down and I don't have to deal with it till March. Yeah, sign me up. Where do I sign? I can get to work on time Monday. Yeah, I'm in. And so, it's like, it's
and
how
the
we
excitement
present.
of a new car.
Yeah.
On top of that.
Yeah, that's something else we have to really address here is that the timeliness here, I can help solve it. And so a lot of times the other interesting element to all this, some dealers would try to repair that car. And I may or may not repair that car, but I'm going to try to get the customer happy right away. Will solve a problem. It will, I can put them in another car, get them to work on time on Monday, and I'll deal with the other car after they're gone. We'll do a full assessment on it. We'll make a judgment if we're keeping it. We'll repair that car potentially for somebody else. And now I've got the original customer happy on the road, maybe mostly happy. I mean, nobody's thrilled about this. It was a difficult situation.
But it's a really kind and transparent and empathetic. It's like, it's I'm willing to take on some of this burden.
Sure. And so we just find a balance, but you can see what the math looks like. I had to get all the way to 65% on me in order to make it even. And it's still not great for the customer. Right.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's fair and it's transparent, as you said. And so that's why I thought it was so important that we break this down in that kind of depth. It happens every day across the country with our clients.
So, we went over like the numbers and we do just reach out to us if you're interested in getting a hold of what it is that Jim has put together that's worked for him as a dealer. And we'd be happy to share that with you. What else?
I can't think of a thing. We got tons of stuff to follow up on. I gotta get out there and just, if just look for a phone call from me because I'm still running down panelists on
or if you're interested,
reach out.
Give us a holler.
Our topics, just quickly for everybody, our topics are going to be
inventory
growth strategies is the first session in the morning. So growth strategies goes off at 9 a.m. Eastern. And then the next one will be inventory pipeline, how to optimize the inventory pipeline. And the last one will be boosting volume in your buy here, pay here, or lease here, pay here business. So it's got a lot of fun stuff. We're bringing experienced dealers to the conversation, and we look forward to seeing you there.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we just appreciate your support so much.
Thank you so much.
See you on Monday.
Again and again.
Yeah.